There are places people can leave, but never truly escape the feeling of belonging to. Mexico is one of those places. The world often sees this country through the familiar lens of sun-drenched resorts, ancient ruins, or vibrant travel postcards. But that's just the surface. This isn't a travel guide. This is the true story of how millions of people actually live, work, eat, commute, and hold on to each other in a country in transition. Right before our eyes is the coexistence of many different worlds. A massive industrial Mexico, where production lines never stop. An agricultural Mexico, deeply rooted in the soil, dependent on water and the weather. A Mexico of megacities, where rushing crowds squeeze through packed subway stations long before dawn. And a quiet Mexico, nestled in small communities, relying on each other through the most ordinary morning routines. But behind that bustle is a persistent reality. Mexico is a country where many must leave their hometowns to seek a future. Modernization brings opportunity, but it also creates distance, pushing workers away from their families and their roots. Perhaps many of us have had that moment of quietly sitting in front of an empty chair at a family meal. A loved one has left for work, driven by the pressure of making a living, for a future, or simply because their homeland no longer has enough room for the ambitions they are chasing. But the remarkable thing is, leaving Mexico never means their homeland leaves them. If opportunity and the wheels of modernization keep pulling people further from home, what relentlessly holds this land together? To understand that invisible pull, we first have to understand how a vast and fragmented country has forced its people to adapt to the distance. Viewed from above, Mexico feels like a miniature continent. The contrast here isn't just about the landscape, it's about how geography shapes the entirety of human life. The north is a world of arid deserts and massive industrial belts, where the rhythm of life revolves around the factory. The central highlands are densely populated, home to bustling megacities. The south and its rugged mountains shelter indigenous communities tucked away in vast tropical rainforests or along the Pacific and Caribbean coasts. These mountains do more than just provide scenery. For centuries, they slowed down travel, isolated communities, and allowed local customs to evolve on their own paths. Geography dictates what someone does for a living, what materials they build their house with, what they eat, and how much time they must sacrifice to reach a hospital or a school. There is no single experience that defines all of Mexico. Across this fragmented space, history is a living, breathing force. The legacy of indigenous civilizations isn't just left behind in stone ruins. It lives on in the hands that plant corn, in the generational craft of kneading masa, in the language, and in a profound relationship with death. The arrival of the Spanish added another defining layer, bringing Catholicism, public plazas, and a new social structure. The identity here is a complex hybrid interwoven, but never fully blended away. Yet, despite the vast geographical distances and all that diversity, Mexican life usually begins on a very small scale: a street, a shop, and a market opening its doors. Before the sun even rises, this country is already in motion. Life doesn't wait for office buildings to light up. It begins with the baker's hands, the sweep of a street cleaner's broom, and the deep rumble of the first buses leaving the station. As the first morning light touches down, the neighborhood starts to speak. The sound of the gas delivery truck weaves through the alleys. Metal roll-up doors clatter open at the bakeries. Locals swing by the tiendita, the little corner grocery store, to grab a quick bottle of milk and a loaf of bread before walking the kids to school. At the heart of all this hustle, the Mercado's officially open. Watch the journey of the food. Produce harvested in the countryside, loaded onto trucks bound for the city, then unloaded at the market. Vendors swiftly stack tomatoes, avocados, and chilies into neat piles. The hot food stalls start puffing smoke. Hands knead dough, press, and grill tortillas, stacking them high, waiting to be chosen for a family's kitchen. The Mercado isn't just about selling food. It is the miniature circulatory system of social life. This is where prices are negotiated, news is traded, and relationships are kept alive. It creates informal jobs, funneling cash from households directly back to the producers. Many of us grew up in a place where the familiar local vendor knew our family by name. In many modern communities, that simple memory of connection is slowly becoming a luxury. In Mexico, traditional markets still fiercely survive right alongside convenience stores. But the reality is that many small vendors still sit precariously on the edge of the social safety net, without a stable income. Those small exchanges keep the neighborhood running. But when hardship strikes, the most important support system isn't found at the store. It's found in the family. A Sunday morning in many Mexican families doesn't start with declarations of love, but with action. Someone heads to the early market. Someone wipes down the large dining table in the center of the house. In the kitchen, someone is busy prepping meat and spices. In the corner, grandparents patiently watch the little ones. Relatives from next door bring over a few extra chairs. Hot dishes are brought out, and the conversation gets loud once everyone is gathered around the table. That isn't just a meal, it is a snapshot of an invisible safety net. In Mexico, the family often functions as essential infrastructure, filling the gaps that the formal system hasn't reached. Look at how a home operates. Instead of moving out right after reaching adulthood, multiple generations often live under one roof or right next door to each other. A house might be expanded, with new space added over the years. Young people continue living with their parents long after they start working, especially when urban rent has far outpaced their starting salaries. This closeness is a well-coordinated model of economic survival. When childcare costs become a burden, grandparents or aunts step in as the primary caregivers. Elder care happens right inside the home too, without relying on professional facilities. And when someone faces a crisis, a job loss, an illness, or tuition due, the family acts as the very first relief fund. Those with an income share it with those who are struggling. Money sent home from someone working far away can help the entire household keep moving forward. But it wouldn't be honest to only look at the romantic side. Love always comes with the heavy weight of obligation. This tight-knit structure can pressure young people to stay close to home, take on long-term financial burdens, or face traditional expectations. It is also where the unequal division of caregiving often places the heaviest burden on the shoulders of women. Perhaps many of us remember a kitchen where more food was always cooked than the number of people actually present. Not because someone miscalculated, but because in that house, anyone returning is always guaranteed a seat at the table. Family can keep people on their feet, but for that system to survive, there has to be an income. So, how does money find its way into these homes? Much of Mexico's economic life doesn't just happen inside office buildings. It starts out in the fields, in the factories, and right on the sidewalk. Mexico has a multi-layered economy: modern export manufacturing, agriculture, services, tourism, family businesses, informal labor, and remittances. These economic sectors don't exist in isolation. They connect directly into the exact same family. Watch the flow of money through a single day. The morning starts with production. Workers step into massive assembly plants in the north. Farmers toil to harvest corn, avocados, and coffee. The baker starts kneading dough before dawn, while the truck driver fires up the engine to haul produce into the city. By noon, the gears of exchange are spinning fast. Goods move into bustling markets. The roadside mechanic takes in customers. The tailor opens their small shop. Family restaurants rush to serve lunch to workers. On the sidewalk, street vendors swiftly prepare food. In the macro picture, industrial belts integrate Mexico into the global supply chain, providing formal jobs. But opportunities aren't distributed evenly. Agriculture ties income to the land, but it is grueling physical work, bearing the precarious risks of weather and fluctuating prices. Meanwhile, the informal economy blankets every urban street. Food vendors, drivers, and mechanics bring incredible flexibility. They create their own income when the doors of formal employment close. But in return, they gamble on a life without contracts, without insurance, without paid time off, and left vulnerable when illness strikes. In the evening, the flow of money shifts to consumption. Workers use loose change to buy takeout. The day's earnings are carefully divided up for rent, bus fare, electric bills, gas cylinders, tuition, and health care. A portion is often scraped together to send to parents or relatives. If you look really closely at those hands, you'll see them diligently counting small bills, wrapping food, tightening screws, harvesting crops, or paying bus fares. Money here isn't just to buy goods. It constantly moves, connecting small livelihoods together into a network of survival. This creates a profound paradox. The national economy might report growth numbers, but a family still has to carefully calculate every tiny expense. Macro development doesn't automatically turn into a feeling of security inside every home. And nowhere shows the tight intersection of hard labor, money, and family more clearly than the place where all those things converge: the kitchen. The kitchen is the final stop on an exhausting journey that begins in sun-drenched fields. A corn kernel is sown, growing patiently through dirt, water, and the harshness of the seasons. It isn't just a crop, it's a witness to thousands of years of history. From the field, the corn is meticulously processed and ground into masa. Then, guided by human hands, it's shaped, pressed, and seared on a hot griddle to become a tortilla. That humble tortilla shows up in rushed breakfasts, at roadside taco stands, in the middle of lively family dinners, at festivals, and even in the lonely kitchen of someone living far from home. Food carries far more than just the function of sustenance. It's a massive network of livelihoods sustaining the farmer, the delivery driver, the Mercado vendor, and small restaurants. Beyond that, food is a living dictionary that preserves knowledge. Look at the process of preparing mole. No one makes this dish in a rush. It requires a whole group of people, each handling a meticulous step, from roasting chilies and grinding seeds to constantly stirring the sauce. The dish is only complete through collective effort. Mole is the perfect metaphor. Mexican identity doesn't come from a single ingredient. It's the blending of many cultural layers, woven together without ever losing their true essence. Out on the sidewalks, street food is more than just a culinary icon. It's fuel for the working class, a survival skill honed over decades, and a community gathering point after a long, exhausting day. You'll rarely find these recipes in books. They are passed down through observation, through smell and taste, through the feel of dough on the fingers, and deeply ingrained experience. Sometimes, we don't return home by taking a trip. We return through a scent, a specific way of seasoning, or a dish that our hands have remembered longer than our own minds. A single meal can completely recreate that feeling of belonging to a homeland, even when the person cooking is thousands of miles away. But the relentless pace of urban life is slowly stripping away the time meant for the kitchen. Ingredients, prices, and consumer habits are changing. Heritage doesn't just disappear overnight. It fades away as small, everyday routines are left behind. Today, in many families, the person holding the generational recipe no longer lives with the one meant to inherit it. And that dividing distance often begins with a bus ride. How people move reveals the structure and the fractures of a society. In massive megacities like Mexico City, millions of workers rely on the metro system and sprawling bus networks. These long, exhausting commutes mean the workday has to start before dawn and end long after dark. Family time is drastically swallowed up by time spent in transit. In small towns, colectivos or shared vans act as a vital lifeline. They tirelessly connect neighborhoods to markets, schools, hospitals, and employment hubs. On a national scale, a network of long-distance buses crisscrosses the entire country. They do more than just connect major cities to remote villages. They connect workers to their families, the youth to their roots, and places of opportunity to places that still hold their memories. The sight of a young person packing up to leave their hometown is incredibly familiar. The family gathers to help pack. A hearty meal is served right before departure. Final words of advice are shared. The bus engine rumbles and pulls out of the station. Those left behind quietly watch it fade away, while the one leaving stares out through the glass window. There is no need to dramatize it. This is just a common, stark reality. Families view education and city jobs as the pathway to a bigger future. Many parents willingly sacrifice so their children can study far from home. But that success simultaneously widens the distance within the family. It is a profound paradox. A family works tirelessly to help someone leave, knowing full well that this departure will leave an empty space in the home. Many of us have stood at a station just like that. There are goodbyes spoken not because the love is gone, but because the place we love simply doesn't have enough room for the future we are chasing. Young people might catch a bus back to visit during the holidays, but can they ever return to stay? The answer doesn't just depend on sentiment. It depends on whether opportunity, housing, healthcare, and a sustainable standard of living actually exist outside the major urban centers. Development is never an evenly painted picture. In Mexico, industrial centers and megacities hoard the vast majority of opportunities, while many rural areas and small communities are left with far too few stable jobs. This gap isn't just about income, it's glaringly obvious in the quality of schools, access to hospitals, and transportation infrastructure. But migrating to the big city isn't a miracle cure. A higher city salary rarely guarantees an easier life. Sky-high rent, daily commute costs, basic utilities, and childcare fees quickly eat away at those earnings. When a crisis strikes, the public health system often buckles under massive pressure, while private care remains completely out of reach for most workers. A single health issue can quickly spiral into a financial crisis, and once again, it's the family that has to step in and fill that gap in the safety net. Even the water supply faces massive challenges. Many areas endure severe scarcity, crushed by the demands of urbanization, industry, and agriculture. A water shortage isn't some abstract environmental issue. It directly impacts daily life, driving up production costs and grocery prices. Similarly, a booming tourism industry creates infrastructure and jobs, but it also brings invisible pressures. The contrast is stark between glittering coastal resorts and cramped working-class neighborhoods. Tourism drives housing prices through the roof, creates fierce competition for resources, and sometimes turns cultural spaces into mere consumer products. Look at a family quietly calculating their budget at the end of the month. Their meager funds are carefully divided for rent, bus fare, gas cylinders, groceries, medicine, and tuition. Mexico doesn't lack energy or the ambition to rise. The greatest challenge is ensuring that progress doesn't just live on paper, but actually translates into a real sense of security in everyday life. Because when a place cannot offer enough sustainable opportunities, its people are forced to leave. But does leaving truly mean they have abandoned their homeland? Those who choose to stay home do so because their families need them, because their work is tied to the land, or because they find deep meaning in a familiar network of relationships. For them, a simple life with the daily presence of loved ones is worth far more than a high income in a strange place. However, that isn't a viable choice for everyone. Those who leave walk away from home, driven by the pressure of living costs, a hunger for education, jobs, and financial security. Leaving can improve their income, help them support their families, and expand their future horizons. But it also creates physical gaps that are hard to bridge. Dinners with an empty seat, the heavy burden of sending money back home, and the unsteady feeling of living suspended between two worlds. They always carry a vague fear that their hometown will change before they can finally return. Yet, returning doesn't have to mean moving back for good. It might just be a weekend bus ride, a gathering at a wedding, a quick stop during festival season, or simply a short video call right at dinner time. These seemingly small actions prove something vital. Home continues to exist as an inseparable rhythm of life. What truly keeps people connected to Mexico when they are no longer there? The answer doesn't lie in a single factor. It is a tight weave of family, language, meals deeply ingrained in memory, a sense of duty, and the deep desire to be recognized by the community. People can leave Mexico far behind, but the bonds that shape their identity never fade away. On the highways and at the stations, money and goods might only flow in one direction, but people, phone calls, and memories move in countless different directions. Perhaps what many of us fear most isn't having to leave home. It's returning one day and realizing that place has learned how to live without needing our presence anymore. But in so many homes, a chair is always kept open, not because the past refuses to let go, but because family love always leaves the door wide open for a return. People don't necessarily have to stay anchored to their homeland forever. What matters is that they patiently maintain the threads of connection that give home its meaning. And every evening, when the plaza fills up again and kitchen lights start flicking on, those invisible threads become visible once more. As the sun dips low, the sweltering heat slowly fades. Traditional markets start closing up, giving way to the steady stream of workers hurrying home. The central plazas gradually fill up with people. Children run around playing, adults take their time on the stone benches, and the melodies of street performers start to echo through the air. Inside the homes, dinner is being served. Hot food is set on the table. Phones are put away for a while. When a late member walks through the door, the empty chair is pulled out, and the meal continues. Mexico isn't an easy place to live for everyone. It is a developing nation, deeply polarized, modernizing at breakneck speed, and constantly facing incredibly harsh choices. But amidst that endless cycle of change, many communities fiercely hold on to the smallest of rituals: buying food from an old acquaintance, sharing childcare duties, heading home for the weekend, setting an extra plate on the table, meeting up at the plaza, or just calling a relative far away. These acts can't stop the changing of the times, but they are the anchors that keep people from getting lost within that very change. In a world spinning faster and faster, perhaps what many of us are searching for isn't a place that never changes. We simply long for a place that still recognizes us when we return. In Mexico, a homeland isn't just the dirt beneath your feet. It is the enduring rhythm of life that people preserve for one another. And perhaps the final question isn't just for Mexico. In our own lives, what is still holding the community together? Share with us what place still gives you the feeling of coming home.